You're listening to the Vint Podcast, where we bring you interviews and stories from around the world of wine and spirits. From winemakers and critics to sommeliers and master distillers, we'll explore the people and businesses who are instrumental in shaping the future of today's food and drinks culture. Enjoy the show. Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of the Vint Podcast, a production of the Vint Marketplace, your source for the world's greatest wines and spirits at vintmarketplace.com. As always, I'm joined by Billy Galanko. How you doing, Billy?
Good to be back. I actually recorded our interview today remotely last week. I was in Montana, so it's exciting to be back in sunny LA.
Yeah, Montana, the country's third largest state.
By land? Is it?
Oh, land and like air mass, air height.
Air mass.
Yeah.
I mean, the area was called the ski resort was called Big Sky. There you go. But no, doing very well. Before we even get into we have a very exciting episode talking about, really focused on one of my favorite regions for wine in the world, just because of different parts of my wine journey I've touched it, Rioja in Spain. Before we get into that, though, when I was traveling on this trip, I did get to have a few special wines. One that I've been really wanting to try, one that I've held on to that you were there when I actually purchased it, and then a couple other ones. So I'll run through real quick. I know it's always not fun when the listeners can't get to taste along, but the very first one I had was Lutzmannsberg Alterraben from Morick. Morick is one of the top producers of Blaufränkisch from Austria. And I don't know if you guys have remembered, but one of my favorite wine books, was Godforsaken Grapes. We're still working on having Jason Wilson on the podcast, but he went and visited this guy and tasted his Blaufränkisch. And I've had a few of their lower bottlings, but he went on and on in the book about how the top tier Blaufränkisch can age, and it's like high quality Pinot Noir. So the bottle that I got, I can't remember how much it was on the Vint Marketplace, like $120, but we've had it for a while. I've been eyeing it, hoping nobody bought it, and I grabbed the bottle, and it was really cool. Definitely lived up to its hype. I think we should have let it breathe for a while more. I double decanted it, but really only let it open up for maybe 30 minutes to an hour. So that was really cool. Super spicy, a lot of the depth but a little more powerful than like a Pinot Noir. But you got like black pepper spices along with dark fruit, like really darker red fruit or lighter, just ripe, like blackberry, but a lot of bramble spice, cinnamon. It was really cool. You could have mistaken it for a complex Pinot Noir, maybe even some aspects like a lighter floral Syrah too. It was really neat.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking of. If you like grew Pinot in the Rhone or something like that, I don't know. Or
yeah,
the Syrah element.
Because there was certainly a floral aspect. I really wish we'd let it open up. I had it sitting aside hoping it would maybe open up and I would revisit it after dinner. And then I was there with some friends and I just saw my friend just pouring out like full half glasses for him and my buddy. And I was like, wait, is there any left? He's, oh no, that was finished. I was like, oh, you just finished the bottle without letting anybody know? Of course, everybody at the table was like, what's wrong with that? I was like, oh, I'd only been waiting to try that wine for a year and a half. That's fine. Everything's fine.
Don't bring something to the table you're not ready to let go.
Yeah, or just keep a separate glass to the side. So the other wines that we had, a couple were interesting. One was the Morgon Côte de Pie by Fouillard, just a classic lower intervention Beaujolais. But again, it was a steal on the Vint Marketplace, like $39. But that was another
I also drank that wine this weekend, and it was fantastic.
Yep. Yeah, mine was showing really well.
Yeah,
I'm glad you liked it as well. Like easy drinker, bramble again, but like some good licorice notes. Really just cool, brilliant wine. And then these are two more. One I'm leaving the best for last. We had two Chardonnay next to each other. One was just a run-of-the-mill Chablis from Dominique and Romain Calette, just generic Vieille Vigne, but generic Chablis. Nice lean, everything you would expect in a baseline Village Chablis. But then the other one that we had with it was a Chardonnay I got from Roussac, which is a Santa Barbara producer, a while back. But they have the fruit that came for this wine came from Catalina Island, which I don't know if you know what that is, but it's off the coast of Los Angeles a little ways. It's like a little ferry ride away. It's mainly unbuilt up. There's like a little area that has like some hotels and stuff on one side, but for the most part, it's wilderness. There's camping areas, hiking trails, but there's not much there. Somehow people planted a vineyard on there years ago. I think it was like in the 60s or something. They don't allow any other commercial activity now. So there's a small vineyard there. And since it's in the middle of the Pacific Ocean, it's like super cool. So this wine was like 12.4, 12.5 alcohol, produced in, I can't remember how many cases, very, very small quantity, under 300 cases or maybe around 300 cases, I think they said. But to get the fruit to the winery, they pick it by hand, put it in bins, and then fly it by little plane over to Santa Barbara, which is super cool.
Huh.
And then it was fermented in 35% New French oak, full barrel ferment. And it came off like a little more like I guess, still riper, still California sun, but closer to a Burgundy-esque type thing with the minerality and the saltiness kind of from where it was grown and the lower ABVs. I thought it was really cool, but definitely a very oak forward Chardonnay to compare to the lean, like stainless style of Chablis that we had.
Very cool. Yeah, I had a cool Chardonnay as well. So we had the Morgon. Is it cooked to pea or pie?
P. Yeah.
Pea. Yeah. And so that was great. But then we also had a Finger Lakes Chardonnay from Living Roots.
Okay. Heard it.
Yeah. So that was cool. I'm trying to find the notes here real quick. Yeah. French oak, 19 months. Yeah. It was, it had the, usually when I buy Finger Lakes, it's not Chardonnay. It's Riesling or, maybe like some Pinot Gris there, a little bit that they're growing, or some other maybe like hybrid variety. But the Chardonnay is really cool because it had like the body that you want, but I guess more reminded me of Chablis or something like that, right? Where you had the body, but you also had like bordering towards like racy acidity, like really like great acidity, minerality there, and then like on the backside the sort of body of Chardonnay that you would expect, which is really cool.
Very cool. I wonder if they built up that mouthfeel or texture through the winemaking more. I wonder if it was like picked lower ABV and then lees and barrel work maybe.
Yeah, like I'm not great at calling it, but definitely some like mallow, like that sort of feel and body maybe. But yeah,
interesting.
But I was just surprised by the acidity because I was thinking, okay, like Chardonnay, I'm just not going to get what I was maybe originally expecting when I pulled a white wine from the Finger Lakes, but it definitely had both. It was cool.
Very nice. Very nice. Yeah. When we tasted the Roussac Chardonnay, I said I thought it had 30 to 40% new oak and it had exactly 35. And I was so proud of myself and nobody could have cared less. Everybody's, I was like, guys, and they're like, Bill, I don't know what oak means. I don't know what new oak means. So that means nothing to me. I was like,
well, you call it oak. I get really excited and it's not like I have an opportunity to do this a lot, but the like whole cluster or like how much whole cluster was used in like Pinot Noir, for instance.
Well, that's fun too. No, that's definitely fun. But to round it out, we had a 2011 Vigna Tondonia Grand Reserve Rosado, which I also referenced in our interview. I actually had bought that when I was with the company on one of our offsites in Charlottesville and has been holding on to it for nearly 5 years now. So I was excited to share that. For those who haven't had...
Right, from Lopez de Heredia.
Yep. Sorry, I didn't mention the producer.
Coveted Rosé.
Yeah, highly coveted. I think Peter calls it a unicorn bottle these days because they're so hard to find, which made me feel better for carting it around for years. And it was really cool. And then for those who haven't had it, it's a less fruit forward style. Obviously, it's extended barrel age, so you get some of the barrel characteristics, but just so much, I don't even know how to describe it. I mean, there's dried flowers, salinity, almost like some oxidative notes that you would get, not sherry-esque, but just a lot of savory notes with it. And it was really neat. Split my friends. Some people just said, I don't like it. Don't give me any more. I appreciate you sharing it, though. Other people were like, this is super interesting. Definitely would be perfect with charcuterie, but it's one of the most complex rosés you'll get. And it was 2011. Still stinging with some like red fruit and acid. It could have kept going for another 10, 15 years easy.
Well, and I haven't had that wine. We do have the 2012 on Vint Marketplace of that wine right now. And I haven't had those, but I have had the rosé from Chateau Moussard, which is in that world, also in that world in terms of just like covetedness and like rosés that you seek out, but probably half the price and a little bit more fruit forward based on the way you're describing. Obviously, they hold back those wines a little bit longer. So maybe you're drinking your Lopez de Heredia a little bit older, then you might drink one of the Moussards. But if you're looking for something similar, listeners can go after the Chateau Moussard rosé if you can find it.
Yeah, Moussard is definitely still hard to find, but easier, I would say, than the Lopez de Heredia one. But yeah, so it was really cool to taste across some of these. And then to have the Rioja, we have Peter Arijs on today from Rioja, and he's basically from the Consejo Regulador. I said that better than I thought I was. Wow. Who basically helps to oversee and promote and regulate, but they're not just a regulation body. They do a lot to basically promote Rioja throughout the world. And it was really cool to talk with him because Rioja was the first wine region I ever went to. When I started studying wine, I used it as an excuse to go to Spain to check it out.
Yeah, I mean, you think about these sort of like bodies that uphold the standards for a region, and you think of maybe like a zoning board in real estate or something like that, but they're not that way at all. And I think Peter did a great job of promoting the fact that they're really just trying to lift up the region and keep everyone on the same playing field, develop standards that allow the region to grow commercially and tourism, all those kinds of things that make a thriving sort of wine culture and economy. And I think he did a great job. It sounds like they have their 100th anniversary, he said, coming up. And so they have a lot of really cool events and sort of promotions and other kinds of things, education in line for that. So it was great talking with them.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. So the reason it has a soft spot for me beyond just, so I had signed up for that intro sommelier exam. I'd read about wine for 2 months, and then I went for a President's Day weekend, like literally like a whirlwind trip, and went up to Logroño. But then lo and behold, on my certified sommelier exam, 2 months later, the master somm asked me for recommendations of wines from a specific region, and he specifically picked Rioja. He's like, can you name a couple producers? And like, I was so new to wine that I probably couldn't have done that for many regions, but since I was literally at Rioja, I was just started like rattling them off to the point where he said stop, and I was like, okay. So it's always held a soft spot, but the value of Rioja's wines are just, I think, some of the most unbeatable. Lopez de Heredia Tondonia still is actually, it's gone up, maybe double since I started studying wine, and it's still one of the best values on the market. A lot of Rioja's reds are, and we mentioned it later in the podcast, but when phylloxera was hitting France, specifically Bordeaux, winemakers would come down to Rioja. They shared their winemaking ways, but then they were bringing wine up to France as like a proxy. So it was like a replacement for Bordeaux for a number of years. And like the quality and the depth of you get in these red wines is unmatched. And then nowadays they have their own unique style that's developed. So really cool to highlight and talk about. He got me just as excited as I was the first time I ever heard about Rioja. So it was great.
Yeah. And like entry level price point, extraordinary in that region. I mean, you can find, is it La Rioja Alta, like for instance, their Reserva for $20-25 and gives you a great sort of baseline Rioja, at whatever local shop you go to.
Yeah, if you can find their Vineyards one, which is like a level
like
up,
40
but it's
there, right? Yeah.
Yeah, it's not quite at their 890. Like they have different bottlings. They have a 904 and an 890 as well. I just use that in my WSET class. And number one is a perfect example of kind of a classic Rioja, at least in the terms of giving off the dill notes that you get from the American oak and some other things. But everybody in the class loved that. Like people who had been drinking wine a while, people who had not, that wine never really fails for me.
And for like unique foil cap lovers, a really nice shade of blue.
Oh yeah,
on that wine, a really attractive bottle packaging.
Oh, it really is. It is one of the prettiest bottles out there for sure. But yeah, so really excited to get to Peter. Before we do quickly here, I wanted to touch on one bit of news for the week, and that is talking about a grape that is close and near and dear to your heart as a Virginia wine lover, and that is Cabernet Franc. We had an article this week highlighting its further progression in terms of quality and prominence in New York, asking whether it's New York's kind of like icon wine or if that is the wine that defines New York now. Many people used to think of Riesling, I guess, upstate, like when you were talking about kind of cooler whites, but now Cabernet Franc, especially from Long Island, are really starting to grab the spotlight.
Yeah, I was going to say, how far up into New York are these wines, calling out Long Island versus upstate? Although, is Long Island upstate since it's not on Manhattan? Does that mean upstate?
Yeah.
I think people before anything outside Manhattan's upstate. Anyways, yeah, I think that's awesome. I don't know if it's one of the effects of, like you said, they have Riesling. Maybe that's what people would call out, but they want to be able to call out a red wine as well. And just in terms of what varieties are being pushed into the marketing ether, you grab Cab Franc as the red wine. I don't know.
Yeah.
I'm not sure what case production, like how close it actually is to Riesling. Like I'm sure Riesling still blows it out of the water, but maybe I'm wrong. I don't know.
Yeah. Well, in the article they mentioned there's 638 acres planted, which is not huge compared to California. I think they have the number of California acres, but they did say 295 of those are in the Finger Lakes, 29 are in the Hudson Valley.
Wow.
Yeah. And only 96 are on Long Island. Okay. Which makes sense because the Canadians grow some good Cabernet Franc as well up there in the lake areas, like by the Niagara districts and such. So yeah, it's not just Long Island. That's part of what they're saying here. It's becoming, all around the state. I will say I have not had many, and I will want to seek them out after reading this article. It's very interesting.
Yeah, always interested in Bordeaux varieties that are not being grown in the regions that come to mind, especially in the States is what I mean. And so whether that's like our state of togetherness, Virginia, or now up in New York, if I ever grew a hobby vineyard, I want to put in Cab Franc. Don't know how hard it is to manage, but that's what
that shows you're really becoming a wine person, Brady, to call out. I don't know how finicky it is to grow, but I love it. I love it.
Yeah, I'll probably do a Cab Franc, Tannat, and what else should I grow? Grenache Gris. I don't know. I'm just...
And then blend it all together.
Yeah, in my tub.
Nice. All right. Well, on that note, back to blends. We're going to go to our interview about Rioja now with Peter Arijs. It's pretty exciting. He touches not only on the red wines, but the rosé wines and the whites. And also they're making sparkling wine in Rioja. Did not know that before prepping for this call. So really exciting. I think you guys are all going to learn something new about Rioja. And if you already know a lot about it, it just really reinforces your love for the region. So here's our interview with Peter Arijs. But first, a note from Brady about the marketplace.
Yeah, if you want to check out some of the wines that Billy and I talked about, you can head over to vintmarketplace.com. We have all the finest wines from around the world, one of the largest selections in the U.S., and some of the most competitive pricing. Whether you're an enthusiast or a collector, the Vint Marketplace is your go-to shop for stocking your wine cellar. As Billy said, without further ado, here's our interview with Peter Arijs.
All right, we are here with very special guest Peter Arijs. Thank you so much for joining today.
Hi, Billy. Glad to be as a host on your podcast.
Yeah, no, we've mentioned a little bit offline that Rioja has a special place in my heart. I actually, to prepare for this, had a bottle of Rioja, the Lipas de Heredia Gran Reserva Rosado last night, 2011, just to prepare for this podcast. So I'm really excited to dive in.
Unicorn wine these days.
It is. I actually shared it with some friends that I only see once a year last night, and they had never had anything like it. So it was cool. But yeah, that's the way to kick off Rioja. I'm really excited. Can you share a little bit about who you are and your background? And then we're going to dive into a really exciting region today.
Yeah, sure. So my name is Peter. I work here at the control board in the marketing department, mainly on wine education international projects. My background is actually different than wine. I'm an engineer by education. I worked in engineering, IT for 20 years. But I gradually got into wine by educating myself just for personal pleasure. I wanted to learn more about it. And as I went through this education process and educated myself more and more at higher levels, I started to also teach myself about it and gradually rolled into it. So that's a bit my career path in learning about wine. And eventually I ended up here because I also went through the education program that Rioja has. I had a link here. My wife is also Spanish from Bilbao. So things came together. And when there was an opportunity to work for the appellation, I gladly took it because it's a great region to work for.
Awesome. Yeah. So can you explain a little bit about what I always have a hard time saying it in Spanish, but what the organization that oversees Rioja is called, if you could pronounce it properly, and then a little bit about the role in the region, then we'll dive more into what is Rioja.
Yeah, so I'm actually Belgian myself, so my Spanish pronunciation is also not perfect. Consejo Regulador, translated to control board, basically. That's the organization I work in. Sometimes internationally, people think of it as a rigid government body or something, but it's nothing like that. It's actually a meeting point where the different actors of the region comes together. And all decisions are made in consensus by, on the one hand, the growers, and on the other hand, the producers or the farmers, the grape growers, if you want. We have two main activities here at the control board. One is, well, as the word says, controlling. things. So that's a little bit more strict, yes. But it mainly has to do with guaranteeing the provenance and the quality of the wines. So we want to make sure that every bottle of Rioja that gets to the market is truly Rioja and it meets the quality standards that we want. And we do that by having some regulations regarding grape growing and production, but we also have a tasting panel that tastes the wine. So that's an important part of the control process, let's say. And then the second part that we are very active in is the marketing part. So actually promoting the region through different campaigns, through education. So that's the part I actually work in.
When was it established, and what was the process for regulating and organizing growers, producers before?
Now, that's a good question. We are actually the oldest demarcated wine region of Spain. The control board was founded in 1925, 100 years ago. So this year we are celebrating our centennial. So that's an exciting time too. I think that was just like the first documents that were put into place, and that there were some regulations tied to that. So everything started then, but it got even stricter and more tight over the years. Definitely in the 70s and in the 80s, there was a vineyard register. Also, the harvest started to be more controlled. In 1991, we moved to being a DOC. So that's the abbreviation for De Origen Calificada. So one of the only two qualified appellations in Spain, together with Pura. And that's a little bit our history. And yeah, there have been some recent developments as well. As I can talk a little bit about that maybe later. But the starting point was 1925, so 100 years old as of today.
Something that we've sort of has come up when we've talked with experts in different regions around the world is the balance of influence between the growers and the grape growers and maybe the producers or the winemakers in a given region. And so sometimes like winemakers or producers are pulling the industry forward and they're helping the growers to catch on to new practices or to increase quality, these kinds of things. And other times it seems to be driven maybe by the growers. Does that sort of dichotomy make sense to you? Does that question make sense to you? And what could you say about the history of this region and how that growers and producers work together?
I think you have to go back to the history of Spain in general to understand that there has always been a separation between the farmers or the growers and the producing sector. And that has been until, I would say, historically, very recently, maybe after the dictatorship of Franco here in Spain ended, there was more symbiosis between those two, you could say. But historically, it was very separated. I think the first estate winery here in Rioja was founded in the 70s, if I'm not mistaken, 1973, Contino. And since then, more and more estates have grown, more vineyard ownership has begun. So bodegas actually owning vineyards and also working a lot closer with their growers, having long-term contracts. And in that way, they can really guarantee quality a lot better.
Yeah, and that's much healthier for the region overall to have that symbiotic relationship versus, growers doing one thing and producers doing another, right? Yeah, positive developments.
Yeah, on the history note, could you talk a little bit about the influence of Bordeaux, the proximity to Bordeaux and phylloxera, and how that helped shape what Rioja's kind of style became a little bit, and then how that's evolving maybe?
Yeah, another excellent question. And because I was talking about 1925 as the official starting point when the first document was signed, but the region dates back a long time before that. 2,000 years ago, Roman times, wine was made here. But definitely that point that you're mentioning, which was like the end of the 19th century, was a very important moment for Rioja, where it actually gained a lot of prominence due to the fact that indeed there was phylloxera arrived to France about 10 years before, 10, 15, if I'm not mistaken, before it came to Rioja. 1899, I think, was when phylloxera arrived in Rioja. But the French were, for a certain window of time, didn't have any grapes to make wine. And Rioja was the closest region, which did not suffer from phylloxera initially, where good grapes were available. A lot of French winemakers, chateaus, what have you, they came to look for grapes here, and they actually established wineries here. A lot of the now century-old wineries, which are still operating today, they were founded in that time frame. And obviously, the French brought with them their knowledge and also their winemaking techniques. The méthode bordelaise, or the méthode bordelaise, if you want to say it in Spanish, the Bordeaux way of making wine, in short, also arrived here, and that involved barrels. So they started using barrels, which was something that was not common to the region. There had been some trials with it before, but it was not commonplace. So that's something that really shaped that style that maybe today we call as classic Rioja. But back in the time, it was actually an innovation. It was pioneering those barrels. So it's always funny to see that what was new at the time is now looked upon as classic. But you're right, that was a key moment in Rioja history, and it's still shaping some of the wines of today and the wineries that are here.
I had some family visit Spain recently. I was like, you got to get up into, Rioja somewhere. Talk a little bit about, they didn't end up going, but talk a little bit about the infrastructure, what it's like for tourists coming and enjoying the chateau, vineyards, the views, obviously, and obviously an amazing food scene as well.
Yeah, it's one of the great trips that I hear many people are making is the north of Spain in general, because I mentioned that the closest city is Bilbao, which is also a nice city to visit by itself. You have also San Sebastian close by. So a lot of people combine that northern part of Spain, and then they spend like a good few days in Rioja, because I think you need a good few days to really visit Rioja. There are actually 200 wineries open to the public. So tourism has been a big part of what's been going on in the region. It's also just a very beautiful region in terms of landscape framed between these two mountain ranges. And there's a lot to discover in all of the sub-regions. You have the historic city of Haro with the Barrio de la Estación. I think the greatest concentration of century-old wineries. They're all in walking distance from each other. You have 7 wineries there. I think 5 of them are a century old. It's like Disneyland for wine lovers, really, Haro, if you can do that. And then you combine it with a few other wineries, because you have this fantastic infrastructure. Here you have fantastic architectural wineries, the Marqués de Riscal building, the Isios building. Beronia just has opened a new winery in Faustino. There's a new construction by Norman Foster. So there's also these great architectural finds, but then you also have these family wineries. So you don't always have to go through to the big names, and obviously they're very worthwhile seeing. But all these little family wineries, underground cellars, families really working together and giving also unique experiences. Cycling through the vineyards is a very beautiful activity. So yes, I think last year we had, or I'm talking not last year, I'm talking statistics from 2023. We had 880,000 visitors, and I think in 2024 we will get to 1 million. For a big region as Rioja, that's not like mass tourism. It's not like over tourist. It's just like at a good point where you have all the facilities, a lot of wineries to visit, great gastronomy. Absolutely, the food here is amazing, and wine is also, certainly for people coming abroad, very obviously accessible. It's everywhere, but also at a very good price point compared to internationally in restaurants. And so anybody that comes to Rioja and this northern part of Spain in general, they always come back with having had a great time, seen a lot, visited a lot. So I absolutely advise it to anyone.
Yeah, it's not like Burgundy where everyone's holed up in the house and you have to go searching for people to talk to about their wines. It sounds very hospitable. So whether it's the big names, the big producers, or going and seeking out maybe the father and son or father and daughter making wine, it sounds like a great place to visit.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's funny you say that about Burgundy. I find that Burgundy is actually very welcoming, but indeed, it's maybe in infrastructure wise, it's a little bit different. Here, the most wineries, they have a well-developed website that you can look them up. You can even make reservations. And also from the Consejo, riojawine.com, we have actually a wine tourism sector section where you can actually find out all the wineries. So I also invite listeners to look for that.
Awesome. Will do. So I think that's a good jumping off point for a little bit. For those who maybe aren't as familiar with Rioja, can you talk a little bit about the region and then talk a little bit about the sub-regions within?
Yes. So It's the largest appellation of Spain, so probably also the most known, also because it's the oldest. It's located more towards the north of Spain. It's a region of 66,000 hectares, which is quite big. If you put that into perspective, it's 2/3 of the size of what is Bordeaux today. It's double the size of Burgundy or Champagne. It's bigger than some wine countries. Pedro Ballesteros, master of wine, he has actually said Rioja is not a wine style, it's a wine country. And it's true, but it's one appellation. So we have never divided it in appellations. Like I was just referring to Bordeaux before. We're 2/3 the size of Bordeaux, but Bordeaux has 60-something appellations. Burgundy has 100. So we have one appellation, but it is possible to put like on your label sub-regions, villages, and single vineyards if you want to. So that's a new evolvement or a recent evolvement of 2017. We introduced these labeling terms, although the zonal appellations were already used before. So to start with, we have 3 zones. Rioja Alavesa, which is actually in the Basque part of Spain. So that's also a little bit of something that people sometimes struggle with, that Rioja is actually located in 3 autonomous regions. One of them is called La Rioja, and the wine region is called Rioja. But okay, so let's start again with the 3 sub-regions. You have Rioja Alavesa, which is in the Basque part. You have Rioja Alta, which is located in the Rioja province. And then you have Rioja Oriental, which is more southern. It used to be called Rioja Baja, but it was renamed. And that's also largely in the Rioja region, but also actually overlapping a little bit with Navarra. So we're really framed in the north of Spain. We have a very unique climate because if you look at Spain in general, you have 3 climates. You have an Atlantic climate in the north. You have a Mediterranean climate at the east coast, and you have a continental climate in the middle. And Rioja has this unique property that it combines the 3 regions because we get a little bit from the Atlantic influence, shielded by the Cantabrian Mountains, which act as a barrier. We get some of the continental influences, but again, there's a mountain range there, Sierra de la Demanda, and then through the Ebro River, which is a key part of the appellation that I hadn't yet mentioned, but which is really important because it's really located in a valley along this Ebro River. The Ebro River actually ends in Catalonia, so through that valley, we also get the Mediterranean influence. So we get like the best of those 3 climates. We get like enough rain from the Atlantic, but not too much. We get enough heat, but not too much. So it's like the perfect conditions for grape growing, really.
Yeah, it's interesting calling out the 3 different autonomous regions making up this, what we call Rioja. You would think from the outside that maybe there's not like a cohesive or unified style. Where would you direct people if they say, okay, I want to try to understand Rioja at baseline? What types of wines and from which of those regions build the baseline for how you have understood Rioja to be?
Well, Rioja was actually founded as a region of wineries and brands, a region of bodegas. So initially, each bodega had their style. That style was influenced by where they were located. So there was some influence on the location, the grape varieties they were using in a blend, because Rioja was typically a blend, and to a certain extent, certainly in classic Rioja still is. And the aging regime, how long you aged it, in which kind of barrels, how many rackings you did. So if you really want to go back and understand the classic style of Rioja, you should really seek out one of those classic wineries. And that's the style that most people are familiar with and still enjoy a lot. And I think it's a huge advantage that this classic timeless style still exists. But if you wanted to dig a little bit deeper, look for those sub-appellations on a region. You look for something from Rioja Alavesa. Rioja Alavesa is in the Basque part, but it has a unique territory as well because it's like on the slopes of the Sierra Cantabria, south-facing, but more limestone soil. So limestone always gives this specific texture to the tannins of the wines that you will notice. So look for something from Rioja Alavesa or even some of the villages, because you might find La Guardia mentioned on a label or other villages in Rioja Alavesa. And then look for something in Rioja Alta, and you will see that the style there will change, that the tannin structure is different. You have a different blend. So Rioja Alavesa is maybe a bit more focused on Tempranillo. Rioja Alta, you will typically start blending a little bit more. So you will see that the style change. And then look for something from Rioja Oriental, because there it's more southern located. It's a warmer climate. And you find also other grape varieties such as Garnacha, Graciano, which are more adapted to that climate, and you will find that the style is indeed a little bit more Mediterranean, a little bit riper. So I think it's good to start with something really classic from those classic wineries, and then start to look for something that's a little bit more expressive of the location where the wine is made.
Cool. And can you maybe touch on now, we've been predominantly referring to red wines. So let's talk a little bit more about red wines and the different classifications in terms of aging. And then we'll move on to the white and the rosé that's also made. And I definitely have to hear about sparkling that's allowed to be made there too, because I didn't know that existed until preparing for this interview.
Sure. The aging regimes that you referred to, they have also been actually pioneered here. We were the first one to use these labeling terms to also classify them. And then afterwards, they made it into the Spanish national law. We have 3 classifications. Well, you could even say 4, but we have a catch-all classification, which we call generico, but it translates a little bit bad in English. You cannot really say generic because some of the best wines of Rioja are actually made under this appellation, but it's like the greenback label, so you can recognize it by a greenback label. It's basically the style of wine that has no regulations regarding oak aging. So it can be oak aged or it can be not. It can be a very young wine, it used to be called Joven, but it can also be a different wine that has been aged in oak, but not according to a classic oak regimes or larger oak barrels or what have you. So that's that's the base level, you could say. And then you have 3 styles which are more strictly regulated: Crianza, Reserva, and Gran Reserva. They exist for red wines, but also for white wine and rosé wines. That's important to keep in mind. And you made a very good point that Rioja is not just about red wine. But okay, let's indeed start with red wine because it's probably what most people are most familiar with, and it's still the largest part of the production. It basically tells you, moving from Crianza, Reserva through Gran Reserva, how long a wine has been aged in oak. Crianza has a minimum of 1 year in oak, and then needs to be for at least another year either in oak or in the bottle, but like a total of 2 years before release to the market. What you're getting there is definitely some oak influence, but also still a lot of fruit, because it's not like the wine has had a very lengthy aging. So you get that nice combination of still ripe fruit, but also that vanilla, spice, or toasted oak, depending on the type of oak you have used in that wine. As you move to Reserva, you need to age the wine for 1 year longer. So it's still the same in barrel, but in total it's 1 year longer. But you can obviously exceed these minimal times, as many bodegas do. So for a Reserva wine, you're already looking for a little bit more evolution and probably also a more structured base wine that can keep for a bit longer. So a little bit more of a serious wine, you should say. A Crianza wine is often seen more for everyday drinking. It sits at a very good price quality point. The Reserva is already a bit more of a gastronomic wine for somewhat of a special occasion. And then you have the Gran Reservas, which need a minimum of 2 years in barrel and a total minimum of 5 years, also with a minimum of 2 years in the bottle to make sure that they have some bottle age too. And there you're looking at a wine that's already fully developed, perfectly integrated tannins, starting to show some of these tertiary aromas, that also leather, tobacco, really an evolved wine. And I think it's a huge advantage that these classic styles exist. First of all, they give a good indication to a customer what to expect. So even regardless of producer, because there obviously are differences between producers, but you know what kind of style you're going to get. And these are wines that have been aged for you in the winery at perfect conditions. So you don't have to buy a wine very young, is the case in Bordeaux, put it in your cellar and wait for 5 to 10 years before it's at optimal drinking window. These wines are basically released when they are ready to drink. So I think that's a huge advantage and something that still makes these styles very relevant today.
Yeah, it's something I wanted to touch on. When people think of Rioja, they think of like great wines and I don't want to use the term value because that makes it seem like they're cheaper in some way. You're getting these wines that typically, if they were held back in other regions, like even say like Napa, if some Napa region held a wine back for 3, 4, 5 plus years, some of these, top producers, bodegas are holding their wines even longer, like closer to 10 years sometimes before release. Like you would be paying such a premium for those, and the quality of the wine that you can get from Rioja at, comparatively reasonable prices is crazy based on like how much work and time goes into each bottle. So I love that you're able to explain that in more detail here. Cool. So can you touch on then the requirements for the white and the rosé, and maybe some of, actually, before we do that, can you talk about the grapes that are used? I realize we loosely touched on them, but I don't think many people would be familiar with, Graciano, Tempranillo, and Garnacha in that blend, and then the white grapes that are used as well.
Yeah, let's do that. Let's talk about red grape varieties before we move into the whites. 5 red grapes varieties are permitted in the appellation. The most important and well-known one is Tempranillo. It's 80% of all plantings, so it's still very relevant today. Tempranillo, as the name says, temprano, early ripening, is actually very well suited to this region. As I was saying when I was explaining the climate, we are in the north of Spain, so we don't have the hot climate as in the Mediterranean or in the south of Spain or even in the middle of Spain. So an early ripening grape variety like Tempranillo is very well suited here. Certainly, as climate is also changing, in the colder parts of the appellation, Rioja Alavesa is a good spot. Some of the southern part of Rioja Alta and so on. These are still cooler spots. But in general, Tempranillo has always been a very good variety for this climate and still is today to a certain extent. It's also a variety that's very versatile. You can make young red wine in a carbonic maceration style, which is a very local tradition from here. These wines don't get exported as much, but you can find them here at bars at €1.20 a glass in a bar oven, which are really making wine accessible, which is and making it available to the region, I think, which is important. But it's also making some of the greatest wines of Rioja that sell for 100 times this price. And then they are aged in oak, and Tempranillo has this natural affinity to oak aging, which really brings out all these special flavors. Sometimes Tempranillo can use a little bit of help, and that's why we have some other grape varieties, like you rightly mentioned, Garnacha, Graciano, Mazuelo, and Maturana Blanca. Tinta, we also have the white version, which also are increasingly being used as varieties on their own. What Garnacha brings, or Grenache, as most people might know it with its French name, but it's actually from Spain, so you should use the Spanish name. What Garnacha brings is more red fruit flavors, more soft tannins, a bit more of alcohol and body, and more that floral profile. So that can work quite nice, either in a blend or as a monovariety. There's really a revival of Garnacha, certainly as a monovarietal, because it's really a drinkable style that people are looking for today. And then Graciano is a bit more rustic. It's a lot more tannins than Garnacha, more acidity as well. A bit harder to ripen, certainly historically, because it's also a late ripening variety, just like Garnacha, by the way. But that kind of structure that it brings and that spicy element also, again, works very well in a blend. Certainly, if you're making a blend that's aimed for long-term aging, those tannins, that acidity will really give it that aging capability. And then Mazuelo, it is the same grape variety as Carignan in France. Also has very high tannins, color pigment, and acidity that, again, can work very well in a blend. These three last varieties, Garnacha and Mazuelo, are more Mediterranean grape varieties. So they are also very well suited as climate is changing to keep their natural acidity. They have a longer growing cycles. They're getting more and more interest. And then we have a late entrant, let's say, something that was approved in 2018, Tinta, which is a special variety. It's the same variety as Castex that was recently also approved in Bordeaux as one of the newer varieties. And that's a family of the Cabernet Gros. So it's more closely related to the Cabernet family and also has these pyrazines that you typically find in Cabernet. So that's an interesting variety that's actually was rediscovered here in old vineyards. It had been here for a long time. And we've allowed it as part of the appellation because it provides a point of difference. Again, either as a monovarietal, where I think it's very interesting, but also in a blend it could add something.
It's very cool. And then for those who are thinking Carignan is a French grape, it's also Carignana in the rest of Spain, right? And that's another Spanish grape that is there. And you guys just call it Mazuelo as well. So
yeah, correct. Samso in Catalonia, there's a lot of names for it. It's found throughout this part of Europe, really, the Mediterranean part of Spain, and then also south of France, correct.
I still want to I just wanted to give Spain credit for having these grapes. Everybody thinks France has everything. These two came from here. Awesome. And then, all right, let's move a little bit on to the white varieties, because I think that overlaps, because obviously the rosés can include some of the white varieties. So you want to touch a little bit on Viura, and oh my gosh, I'm blanking on some of the other ones. Macabeo. Do you guys have your own name for Macabeo, or is that Viura?
Yeah, there is Viura.
I'm confusing myself.
Viura are synonyms.
Yep.
And that's the main white grape variety here. We have 9 white grapefruit varieties, so they're not always easy to remember. I would say the 3 classics, they are Viura, Garnacha Blanca, and Malvasia Riojana, which is a little bit confusing because there are many Malvasias in the world, but let's say we have our own version of Malvasia, which is actually Arijs, but okay. Viura is definitely the most important one there of the 3 classic varieties. It's a fairly neutral variety that in young vineyards, maybe sometimes need a little bit of help. That's why we have these blending components. But Viura really comes to its own when you have older vineyards and you have more limited yields. And then it can produce some of the most beautiful wines of Spain and of the world, really. I consider it. Old vine Viura is a beautiful thing. Aged in a bit of oak, can take on a very complex gastronomic character. You have different styles from very oxidative to really more modern and fresh, more like going into a burgundy kind of character. And even sparkling wines, as you mentioned a while ago, I sometimes consider Chardonnay a little bit like a Chardonnay, Viura a little bit like a Chardonnay because of its neutral character, its good acidity, and all these things, reacting well to oak aging, lees aging, etc., etc. So Viura is definitely the most planted white grape variety. About 2/3 of white plantings are Viura. And then of the classic ones, I would also like to highlight Garnacha Blanca, natural color mutation of Garnacha, but is having more that spicy element, adding a bit of fruit, like a similar profile you could say as red Garnacha in a blend is the white Garnacha. And I've drunk quite a few monovarietal Garnachas that are very interesting. That spicy profile really works well. There has good freshness. So those are some grape varieties to remember. Then we introduced 6 new varieties in 7. So that was to give the white grapes a little bit of, or the white wine production, a bit of a stimulus, because, well, we all know that white wine has been growing a lot of recent years, and we also saw a need to allow some new varieties. Some of them had been discovered here locally. Some of them are more international, but they were already used in Navarra, for example. And the main one to point out there is Tempranillo Blanco. Tempranillo Blanco is a natural color mutation of Tempranillo. It was discovered in a vineyard in Rioja Oriental, where a grower suddenly noticed that among his Tempranillo vines there was a bunch of white grapes, and they took cuttings for it. They reproduced it. They investigated if it had some interest in actually producing wine, and it seemed that it had quite good winemaking potential, and it had a profile that we didn't have here in Rioja because it's more aromatic, a bit more tropical in character. So certainly for a young wine that's more fruit-driven, Tempranillo Blanco is very well suited, and you can blend it with Viura, you can blend it with other things. But it's now the second most planted grape variety. Just from 2007, there was nothing of it, and now it's already the second most planted grape variety. So that's really an interesting one to mention. And also because people are familiar with the Tempranillo name, so Tempranillo Blanco will sound familiar with them. And it's also unique to here because it was discovered here. No other region is actually using it. I think that's certainly another one to mention. I cannot go through all the other ones in detail. We have things like Turuntés, that's really small in terms of planting. I do think Maturana Blanca is interesting to mention because it's a grape variety that's probably the oldest one that was around here, with history dating back to the 16th century, but it was also discovered in old vineyards, and it's a crossing of Savagnin and Castellana Blanca. So it has that more northern Atlantic profile. It's really fresh, racy acidity. So that's really an interesting grape variety to watch. I think in the future we'll hear a lot more of Maturana Blanca. And then we also allowed some international grape varieties here: Chardonnay, Sauvignon Blanc, Dejo. For Dejo, not really international, also from Spain. As I said, they were already used in Navarra. There was some experimentation with it. So they're also allowed, but I think really the future of Rioja is in finding the best of those 9 varieties, and I think there's really a lot of potential there.
In terms of like export volume between the reds and the whites, is the market overall just growing for both wines, or are the white wines maybe taking up some of the share of the export coming out as that sort of gets more popular?
Yeah, definitely. I don't have exact figures for export for full colors here from the top of my head, but I mean, worldwide, the white wine consumption is growing, and I think it's almost 50-50 now. And in some markets, there's even more white wine consumed than red wine. We've seen the effect. White wine in Rioja, production-wise and sales-wise, has doubled in 10 years' time. So when we made that change of new grape varieties, it has really given an impulse to the white wine production. We are currently the second white wine appellation of Spain. Few people realize that. Rueda is number one, but we overtook Rías Baixas already 2 years ago. So a lot of people, when they think of white wine from Spain, they don't immediately think of Rioja. But I mean, we produce more than 30 million bottles of white wine per year. That's quite significant. Some appellations don't even produce that in general. So people should start seeking out Rioja white wine because it's really very interesting. And you're right, also in exports, in fact, in general, in sales, white wine has taken a good part of the share of red wine, which, in fact, over the last few years has been slightly decreasing, as did the rest of the market. In 2024, we had a little bit of a rebound again, but white wine is definitely what's growing. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, we talk about the value that's found in the red wines from Rioja, but even more so the value in the white wines in terms of quality to price, for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
Good. Well, and we also wanted to maybe hear about some of the rosés. I've really enjoyed especially some of the rosés I've had. Grenache, obviously, I always love rosé made of Grenache. Maybe you can talk to some of the styles there and how that has grown into the market and how it came about.
And also, before you answered it, maybe how it might differ from like Navarra's rosés, since those are pretty well known and they're very distinct, I think, between the two.
To a certain degree, I think one thing that you will always find back in Rioja that in all the styles, there's a lot of diversity. We already have 14 grape varieties to work with. We have such a large territory, 66,000 hectares. We have different bodegas, each with their own styles. You have all these colors of wine. So the diversity is just enormous. And even within styles, even within a style as rosé, there is diversity. There's people going after the Provence style rosé. Actually, we had to change our regulations to allow for a lighter color for that, because in the past it was not allowed. There's people making it more in a Navarra style, which is more like bleeding off the skins and getting more fuller body rosé. The Provence style is more direct pressing, obviously, much lighter. But something I think unique to Rioja is the clarete style. And what clarete is a co-fermentation of red and white grapes. So as we all know, in most appellations, it's not permitted to blend white and red grapes to make rosé wines. But in Rioja, you can do it prior to fermentation. So you can put some white and red grapes together in the fermentation tank, and you can let the fermentation start. It can go up to a certain point, or you press before it's fully fermented. And that's really a clarete style. And the advantage there is that you really have complexity of both using red grapes and white grapes. You have the acidity of the white grapes as well. So I think that's a very interesting style. Actually, there's a little bit of a clarete revival going on. I've even seen T-shirts like "Make Clarete Great Again." So it's a very interesting style. And then you even have oak-aged rosés, like the one you were just pointing out. Very special rosés that you don't find anywhere else in the world. Rosé is a bit of a hidden treasure, I would say, in Rio. There's a master of wine, Elisabeth Gabet. She really specializes in rosé wine. And a little bit more than a year ago, I think she produced a report on the best rosés of the world. So she tasted premium rosés from all over the world. And Rioja scored really high in that report. We had the top two spots. The two best rosés in the wines in the world were Rioja. And Tondonia was not even included. Otherwise, we might have swept the podium. But just to give an indication, so there's so much diversity and so much. And I think rosés are, in Rioja, they're more gastronomic typically. I've mentioned that some producers do go after the more Provence style rosé and do a very light rosé, but there's a lot of competition for that, right? So if they're able to sell it and it works for them, great. But I think what's really unique to Rioja is these more complex gastronomic rosés.
Yeah, we actually had Elizabeth on the podcast, I don't know, within the last year, within the last 6 months maybe, and she was raving about some of the Spanish rosés. It was very cool to hear. Before we move on to broader picture where you see Rioja going, I wanted to touch a little bit on the kind of the zona type things that you were talking about. So the Vina de Zona, Municipio, and the Singular. I think to your point earlier, it's interesting because there's that trend. Everybody's trying to go almost like Burgundian in style, and I know even like in Austria, that everybody's trying more single site's the best. But you do have these bodegas with a really distinct style based on the winemaking, not necessarily just the vineyards. How do you see different producers balancing this, being like, this is our style, but this is also an expression of the single site or a smaller site?
Yeah, I think both styles can coexist, certainly in a region as Rioja, where the history is in more style that's coming from the bodega, from, let's say, the winemaking and working with different components, aging regimes, and so on. But now there's a bit of a trend of what I call unblending, because all of these components that you have in a blend, they could actually make very interesting wines on their own. So obviously, the producers here, they have always known where the best parcels were and what were the grape varieties that worked best, because they put the best stuff in their best wines, in their Grand Reservas, in their best wine of the winery. And now and it is influenced by, of course, by what's happening internationally. And people, the younger generation, is also traveling, doing a harvest abroad, and they see what's happening there. So they are starting to see, wow, maybe I have this great parcel here that I've always put in a blend. Let's just make a wine of it on its own. And sometimes it can really deliver beautiful wines. Some of the best wines in the Rioja appellations are single vineyard wines. And we as an appellation, we wanted to also provide that flexibility to growers. And we developed like a classification which is parallel to the oak aging regime, where you could mention, as I've mentioned from the start, you have zonal wines. So that's the first level. You can put one of the 3 zones on your label. We have village wines. So there's actually the opportunity there for 144 villages to express themselves. That's maybe a little bit much for a consumer to remember. But I'm hoping that some of the key villages of Rioja will start gain a name, because if you look at all the great wine regions especially the old world, they have gained their fame thanks to their villages. In Italy, in Piemonte, Barolo, Barbaresco, in Bordeaux, you have Margaux, Saint-Estèphe, Saint-Emilion. At the other side of the bank in Burgundy, you have all these villages as well. So I hope that little by little people will say, well, here's a wine from Alfaro, which is in the south of Rioja. Oh, that rings a bell. One of our greatest growers, Álvaro Palacios, for example, is based there. I want to try a wine from Alfaro because I expect it to be a little bit more Garnacha driven. I expect it to be a little bit more of a Mediterranean style. Or I want to try a wine from La Guardia. Or I want to try a wine from San Vicente, which is more in the northern part, because that's also where a lot of high quality producers are, and it has a more direct style, more Tempranillo driven. So I'm hoping that little by little, these villages also start gaining a little bit of recognition, and that, by putting that on the label, the producers can also differentiate themselves. And little by little, we're starting to see a little bit of a village expression as well. And then the top part of the pyramid, if you want, is the single vineyards. So that's also something that we have regulated from a Consejo. So you can't put a single vineyard or viñedo singular. Actually, you should use the Spanish name on your bottle. If you have a parcel that you have submitted to the DO, that you have proven that it meets all the qualifications, needs to be at least 35-year-old. The yields need to be lower than in general, and it also has to pass a tasting panel. So it's also a quality guarantee to a consumer. Those wines need to score at least 92 points. So if you buy a Viñedo Singular, you also know that you're buying a high quality wine. And yes, currently I think we have 162 parcels classified as Viñedo Singular, and it's just given that extra opportunity to producers. And some producers don't always use it. There's other producers that also make single vineyard wines, but they don't apply for the classification. But at least it's given a stimulus, and people starting to experiment. And same with single varieties, just looking for a specific variety to vinify on its own. Like I say, there's a bit of a Garnacha revival. You have beautiful Garnachas here from Rioja Oriental, from the Alto Najaria Valley, for example, that they are just beautiful on their own. And I think it's good as a control board. We want to give that freedom. I think Rioja is actually a very permissive appellation. The only thing that we ask is what you state on the label is true. So if you put single vineyard on there, it's not a fantasy's name. It's regulated. If you put Gran Reserva on there, it's not because you want to say buy this wine, but it's actually something regulated and so on. And I think the two, and this has been shown also in the market, can perfectly live together.
Yeah, that's great. And wanted to make sure that we touch on before we have to wrap up here, to circle back around to the Centennial and anything else that you wanted to share. If you have social programming or education or things that you're doing as to celebrate the 100 years.
Yeah, it's the 100 years is an important celebration. It's also something that we want to use to make sure that people understand that Rioja is not this old region that's 100 years old and it's old and dusted. No, I think Rioja is still very much alive today. There's a lot of exciting projects going on. Just to quote another master of wine, Andreas Kubak, who also makes wine here, I once heard him say, Rioja is currently the most interesting emerging wine region of Spain. So to say emerging for a wine region that's 100-year old sounds a little bit strange, but it just reflects that kind of innovation is always been part of our DNA. Even like when we started with oak barrels, when we started like regulating Crianza classifications and so on. And today there's so many interesting projects, young growers, the whole concept of terroir expression that I just went into. So we want to highlight that as part of the centennial. I'm struggling with that word. Let's just say 100-year anniversary. So we want to highlight that Rioja is still very relevant. There's a lot of exciting things going place, and we have been pioneers, and we continue to be. And in terms of activities, yes, there's a lot going on here in Spain. All our marketing campaigns are going to be with the theme of the 100 years. There's coming a new video clip out on national TV, an advertisement, but there's also a celebration taking place on the day that the actual first document was signed, that all the important people of the region and even of the country, the king is even coming on that day to celebrate Rioja. We're hosting a lot of activities, educational activities also in different countries. So we have a few key markets: UK, USA, Canada, Germany, Mexico, Switzerland, things where we have specific agencies in place that organize activities for us. And these will all be centered around 100 years of Rioja. So I think as a consumer, as a listener, I hope that you will hear something of this 100 years. Otherwise, we're not doing things right.
So if anyone wants to either learn more about the 100 years, they'll see this marketing. But then also, can you talk about if consumers just want to learn about Rioja and get started and figure out their journey? Did you want to talk about the academy a little bit that they can learn in?
Yeah, sure. So it's actually nice to round off like this, because I've actually gotten into wine through education. I think education is a really powerful tool to obviously to learn, but to also discover what you like. And certainly in Rioja, as I was just explaining, this diversity can be somewhat challenging to a consumer, right? 14 grape varieties, all these styles, all these classifications. So Rioja Wine Academy is a great place to start. It's a free online portal that we offer with the aim of really understanding this diversity and promoting Rioja. So anyone listening, they can sign up. It doesn't cost anything to create an account. We have courses at every level, going from a beginner level to a more expert level for people working in the trade. We just also launched a tasting course, which I think is very exciting, that you can actually interactively taste Rioja wines through a tasting pack. So I invite everybody to go to www.riojawineacademy.com and check out all the great resources we have there.
Very cool. I did not know that was free. So I will actually be using that for my MW studies, and I think anybody at any stage, like you mentioned, you can go. It's a great intro. Perfect. Well, thank you so much, Peter. This has been great. I know I learned a lot. I always love talking about Rioja. I think it's one of the I think it's appreciated, but one of the most underappreciated by many wine lovers throughout the world. So I think I'm excited to shine a light on it and bring it to the forefront.
Absolutely. And I invite everyone to come here, because it's just a very beautiful region. It's the perfect moment to visit Rioja.
All right. That is our interview with Peter Arijs. I hope everybody is really excited to drink some Rioja wines. Definitely go check out the Rosés, the whites, the reds. And if you can find some sparkling, let me know, because I would also like to try those. But for now, that is our episode for this week, and we'll be back with another episode next week. Cheers.